Hi everybody, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to take a look at the last two games that didn't make the top five. So these are the two games that finished just outside of the money in the 2007 US Chess League's Best Game Countdown series. So the first game we're going to take a look at is the 7th place finishing game played between Julio Becerra of the Miami team against Alex Strapunski from the Queens team. This was played in week 6, and in my opinion this was one of the best games of the year. So I think I voted for this one to be the 3rd place finishing game, somewhere around there. In any case, I was very high in this game, and I still am. So I think my fellow judges underrated this game a bit. So we'll take a look at this first, and then we'll take a look at a game that is just the opposite for me. So I thought the other game wasn't really so exciting at all, but I was by far in the minority among my fellow judges. So anyway, we'll take a look, we'll see, and you can decide for yourself, of course. Alright, so here we are, Becerra against Strapunski, e4, c5. Both these players are grandmasters, by the way, so I should point that out, and also add that that's part of what I think inclined me to view this game highly. So in general, if the game featured a couple of grandmasters, I was more inclined to give it a high rating, assuming, of course, it was a good game as well, because I'm assuming a higher level of difficulty in the performance. Okay, d4 takes, and now a6. So we've got, at least for the moment, the Khan variation of the Sicilian defense. That's K-A-N, so it's not the same fellow as the Caro-Kann was named after, or one of the two players that it was named after. So I believe this is named after Ilya Khan, who was a very strong Soviet master, primarily playing in the first half of the 20th century, maybe only playing in the first half of the 20th century. So I'm not sure exactly what his dates are, but certainly he was playing in the 30s and 20s, and I think in the 40s as well. Okay, anyway, it's a very flexible approach by black. So putting these pawns on a6 and e6 takes squares like b5 and d5 under control. If you hate facing the Rossolimo or the Moscow variation of the Sicilian, you might want to consider setups like this where you don't have to worry about any bishop to b5 stuff. And what black is essentially doing is waiting to see how white arranges his pieces before deciding how to develop. So the knight from b8, this guy, will usually find its way here, though not in this game as it turns out. Sometimes the knight from g8 will go to f6, sometimes it'll go to e7. And this game, surprisingly, it even goes to c6, while the knight from b8 ended up on d7. Black can also arrange his, well, not all of his remaining pawns, but most of the remaining pawns in quite a number of ways, too. Sometimes black fianchettos. Other times the bishop comes to c5. Sometimes it ends up on a7. Sometimes it ends up back on e7. I think we've got a little too much stuff on the board here, so let me get rid of all these arrows. This bishop on c8, sometimes it's fianchettoed out here. Other times it, it could play d6 and transpose into a Scheveningen, and the bishop could go anywhere from there. And also another idea for black is that sometimes he plays, as I said, knight c6, and if white makes this exchange, then d takes c5, black will often play e5, and this bishop will have new vistas. Maybe it can come to e6, maybe even g4 in some unusual cases, but primarily it would be e6 there. Although also there could be some line where it doesn't push e5, but plays c5 and bishop d7, c6. But that's again rare. I mean, e5 followed by bishop d6 would be by far the most common idea in that kind of setup. Though also after knight takes c6, sometimes b takes c6 can be played, and then either c5 and bishop to b7, or a5 and bishop to a6. So hopefully you're getting the idea that this is an extremely flexible setup for black. And again, just about any piece can end up practically anywhere that's within reason. So also this knight from g8 could go to g6 sometimes, another idea. Sometimes this bishop goes to d6 in conjunction with the queen on c7, and from there maybe to e5 or to f4. So you can see there's almost no end of possible ways for black to deploy his forces. Alright, well, we're not going to discuss much of that. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about this particular Sicilian. And now we'll proceed. So bishop to d3 is probably the most common move for white. Actually, let me check just to see if that's still the case. It certainly used to be. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close between that and knight c3. And c4 is sometimes played too, but bishop to d3 is certainly one of the two main moves, the other being just knight to c3, getting on with the traditional development. The point of bishop to d3 as opposed to knight c3, though, is, again, a couple of points. One is that sometimes white will still want to play c4, which obviously can't be done after knight c3. And also, by delaying the knight on c3, you might make it less possible for black to have some kind of b5, b4 idea at some point. So anyway, bishop to d3 is very flexible. Okay, knight e7, knight c3, and now Straczynski plays what at least strikes me as a fairly artificial-looking move, though already we're in a little bit of an unusual spot here. Black's knight to e7 is pretty unusual here. I mean, knight to f6 and bishop c5 are far more common, and so are a lot of other moves, frankly. So knight e7 is a little unusual. Knight c3. Yeah, castling is also more common here. So again, both players are playing a little bit, well, mostly black, but even white with knight c3 are playing a little bit off the beaten track. Okay, and now knight e to c6, very strange-looking move. And of course, if white trades, that would kind of justify this idea for black. So white naturally retreats to b3, which is a typical idea anyway in this opening. Okay, black plays b5, bishop to e3, d6, our first novelty of the game, f4, and now our second novelty, and I believe the last one, knight to d7. So sometimes that happens. You know, you'll make a new move, but it's or a move that hasn't been played in the position before, but it ends up just transposing to what's been played. So anyway, let's take a look at this position after knight to d7 and figure out what's going on here. I mean, where is this knight from d7 headed? Is it going to f6? I mean, that would really be peculiar. Straczynski would have taken 4 moves to do what he could have done in 2 moves, just knight f6 and knight c6 right off the bat. So that would seem kind of odd, and in fact, the knight doesn't go there, or if it does, it doesn't go there for a long time. Yeah, never goes there. But if not, then it's still not clear what the big idea is. I mean, is he going to put the knight on b6? That doesn't seem that exciting. So I don't know. I mean, I find black's setup kind of artificial, and it doesn't work out very well either, but perhaps there's some deeper idea. In any case, Becerra keeps making natural moves, and they turn out to be good moves here. Queen f3, and this little third rank lineup here is, again, something that happens fairly regularly in this variation. One game you might want to check out, I don't remember what it's from. I think, let me see. I mean, it's in a non-Kramnik game. I'm trying to remember from what event. I think it was a tiebreaker. Maybe it was from their rapid match back in 2000 or 2001. And anyway, Anand just used this setup and just obliterated Kramnik. Now, of course, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of games where black has won from this kind of position too. But you know, it turns out to be a pretty effective setup. White is going to play g4, g5, or at least would if there were still a black knight on d7, or on f6, I mean. Here, with the knight on d7, there's really not any reason, and so white can play even more straightforwardly. So, Straczynski played bishop to b7, protecting the knight, and putting the bishop on the good diagonal. White simply castled short, bishop to e7. And after queen h3, I think we can say that white is already in the middle game, while black still seems to be in the opening. So white is preparing for various attacking possibilities. If black castles, then e5 or f5, or maybe some combination of the two, is forthcoming. And so black already has to be pretty careful here. If, for example, he castles, so let's take a quick look. I think white has a couple of reasonable possibilities. So one is a positional, well, actually they're both pretty sharp. So a4 is one idea with the point after b4. Now we'll play knight to d5. So it's often good to force b4 before you play knight to d5 in these kinds of setups, since the pawn on b4 gives the bishop the c4 square, which can be useful sometimes. And in other setups, you have c3, which could open lines if, let's say, black were still able to castle queenside. That can prove useful. So, at any rate, knight to d5, say ed, we're threatening mate on h7. These two. So g6, and then we swap. And this position probably favors white a little bit. So black's bishop is pretty good on this long diagonal, the c6 bishop I mean. But still, black's kingside is a little bit weakened, and the d6 pawn is isolated. And overall, white should have a better position here. Not tremendously better, but somewhat. Okay, another approach instead of this knight to d5 idea is to play simply e5. And after g6, now we've got a couple of possibilities. The first one that came to mind for me when I was looking at this was f5. So let's just try to crush black right off the board here. So e takes f5, ed, bishop d6, and now rook takes f5. So a very direct approach. It looks like black can take the rook and just survive. So it won't be better. He's got to play perfectly, but it looks, at least I wasn't able to find better than a draw for white. So knight f6, bishop g5. Now here, if we try bishop to c8, hoping to swap off this light squared bishop before bishop f6 and queen h7 mate happens, well, the problem is that now there's queen to g5 mate to worry about. So bishop to c8 is a bad move. Best is h5. And, okay, here I looked quite a lot, and I couldn't find anything decisive for white. So knight e4, bishop e5, takes, queen h5, rook e8. So I actually got this far myself and couldn't find anything, and it turned out that this pretty much squared with what the computer came up with too. So just to continue its line, or maybe, I don't remember exactly where I deviated, but I saw through knight b to c5, and it looks like this is just a draw. So a position like this. And now white just gives perpetual check. And there doesn't seem to be anything better than that. So maybe there's something better, but I wasn't able to find it, and at least as long as I tried to mess around with the computer, it didn't find anything either. So going way back here, it looks like f5 just doesn't quite work. So maybe the best is simply this positional approach with e takes d6, knight e4, and then c3. Just stabilizing everything, and white will follow up with rook a to d1, and should have, again, a small edge here. So it's got a little bit better space. Black has some small kingside weaknesses still. That could become a factor. So white's position is preferable. Alright, so that's what happens on castles. Another possible move for black here that's definitely worth considering is knight to b4. Delaying castling and giving himself the option of exchanging off this dangerous bishop on d3 when he needs to. Along these lines, I would suggest taking a look at some of the Anand Kasparov games from their 1995 World Championship match. Mostly the games where Anand had white, and you'll see that it was a Najdorf. Well, it was a Scheveningen from a Najdorf move order. You'll see there are quite a few games where this bishop on d3 was quite powerful, and it was very important for Kasparov to time knight to b4. Sometimes he did it right, sometimes not. All right. Well, in any case, Strapunski chose a third option, bishop to f6, and Becerra punishes this very nicely. So he uses, well, actually, before I say what he does, I'll suggest that maybe you stop the recording at this point and try to figure out what white ought to play here. So it's not a tactically winning sequence or anything, but it's a very nice, well, I don't know how to describe it without giving it away, so it's just nice. I'll just put it that way. Okay, so here's what he does. He uses what Hans Kmoch called the sweeper-sealer twist many years ago. So e5 is kind of the sweeper move. It clears stuff out of the way. That's the idea. And then after d takes e5, f5. So there's the sealer idea. So what he's doing by making this little pawn sacrifice is that now he's blockaded black's pawns and cleared all these nice light squares for his pieces to use to some degree at his whim, really. So white has a dominating hold over these very important light squares that he didn't have before. Plus, he's opened the f-file too. So if you look at this position, white's bishop on d3 has nothing to do at the moment. d5 and f5 are not available to white knights, or e4 for that matter. But after this very nice sack, now all of a sudden black can't castle kingside because he would just get mated. g6 would simply lose a piece because white would take on d7 twice and then play rook takes f6. And you can see white's pieces are all ready to come to fantastic squares. Rook goes to d1. Knight maybe goes to e4, possibly d5 in some cases, with tremendous pressure. Also, maybe this knight can come to c5, which shows quite usefully that white has also managed to get rid of that d6 pawn too, so he maybe even gets better control over the dark squares as well. So a very nice idea from Becerra, and here Strapinski is in big trouble. Alright, he played knight to e7, and here I think Becerra made his only inaccuracy of the game. He played bishop to g4, but this seems to be second best, though very natural. I mean, he wants to keep this very powerful bishop, but it would have been better for him to keep up the pace of his attack with rook a to d1. And here I think black is just about lost. So for example, knight f5, queen f5, and now the threat is to play knight c5, if nothing else. Oops, knight c5. So queen to c7, get out of the way. Now knight to a5, another hammer blow here, threatening to take twice on d7 and then take on b7 at the end. So rook to d8 looks like the right move. Knight b7, queen b7, and now rook to d6. And here, white just wants to triple up on this miserable knight and simply win it, if nothing else. So castles, and here black has just enough coverage, so if rook f to d1, he can move the knight, and he's okay. But knight to d5 is showing black that he's not out of the woods yet, because now the threat's to take, well, actually, let me see. What exactly is the threat? So one threat is to play rook takes d7 and then knight takes f6, maybe, with the idea of queen f6 and bishop h6. Another idea is simply to play rook f to d1 next. And it also prevents the black knight from escaping d7, because then we can just take on f6 without sacrificing anything at all. So here, black is just busted. And if bishop to h4, white has a very strong move, queen to e4, threatening not only to take the bishop on h4, but also some knight discovery. Well, it's a knight check, discovering the white queen's attack on black's queen. So queen to b8 is the only move, counterattacking the white rook. Rook c6 is best, better than rook to a6 for a reason you'll see in a moment. So bishop f6, and now rook c7. And here, again, the threats are mounting. White's going to play queen to f5, and black is just dead. So the threats to take the knight on d7, of course, and, well, I was going to say if the knight moves, but it's not even clear that it can move anywhere. If g6, then queen to h3 simply renews the threat to take on d7, and then to take on f6. So black is just completely lost here. So that would have happened on rook a to d1, but as I said, Becerra played bishop to g4, and this gives him just enough time to survive. So queen c7, knight a5, so still a very good move. If queen takes a5, then we check, and now whatever the black king does, he's in desperate trouble. So if king to d8, then b4 is a very nice shot, because queen takes b4, bishop b6 is mate, or if queen c7, simply rook a to d1. So the queen on c7 blocks the king's flight square, and this is horrible. And of course, white has only gone up one pawn for this completely dominating position. Alright, if black tries king f8 instead, well, this fairly obvious sacrifice is crushing, threatening to take the knight now, and threatening bishop to h6. So this is completely winning for white. So after knight to a5, black can't take. Instead he played bishop to c8. White ratchets up the pressure with rook a to d1. And now queen takes a5 still isn't good. So queen a5, bishop d7. Okay, and now if black takes the bishop, then we have this. And queen takes e7 is winning, or you can play knight to d5, which is even fancier, with the point that we're threatening knight f6 mate. And if knight takes d5, then queen to g4 is mate. So, I mean, everything wins. So after bishop d7, king f8, rook f6 yet again, and now once more knight to d5 exploits the overloaded knight. So the knight needs to be able to go to g6 against queen to g4 check, but it also has to take care of the white knight, which is threatening knight takes f6. So it's hopeless. All right. Another try for black is to simply castle here, and this looks pretty reasonable. So we castle first, and the knight on a5 can be captured next. Unfortunately, after bishop takes d7, queen a5, notice if bishop takes d7, then rook takes d7, then we can play rook takes f6, which wins material and gives white a decisive attack, I'm sure. All right, so queen a7, and now rook f6. Once again, devastating. Gf, knight e4, knight to d5 is best, protecting, and also with a little cheapo. So he's threatening the bishop on e3, he's covering f6, and of course, rook takes d5 is not the best move on the board on account of queen to e1 mate. So white here is queen to h6. And this looks to be decisive. So the idea is to play knight takes f6 check, and then queen to g5 check first, then queen takes f6 check again, and then bishop to h6 with mate on g7 to come. So black's best is rook b8, takes. The point of this, just to be clear here, is that if knight f6 takes here, then after bishop to h6, there's queen to b6 check. That's the idea. So the best move is bishop to take c8, and now we do this sequence. And here, of course, we don't play bishop to h6 for the same reason, but we take this. And now we're threatening bishop to h6 check, followed by mate on g7. And it turns out that black has no good defense to this. So we can go further with this variation, but it's not really necessary. I mean, everything is going to lead to a win of tremendous material or mate, or perhaps both. So, after rook a to d1, castling is not any good. So instead, Straczynski played the best move. He played knight to b6, getting out of the way of these threats, just moving the knight, which has been under this attack all this time, and hoping to exchange some material. And also, of course, it takes advantage of the fact that the white king is on h1. Actually, no, never mind. I was getting something wrong there. But okay, anyway, knight to b6 is a good move. It's the only move, and I think it keeps him actually in okay shape here still. All right, white played knight to e4, so again, continuing to put his pieces on fantastic squares. The knight's not only hitting f6, but of course d6 too. But black has everything still covered, just barely, but he's still there. He's still hanging on. So the knight now blocks the rook on d1's protection of the d6 square, so knight to d6 check doesn't do anything now except give away a knight. And knight takes f6, he can recapture with his knight, and again, he's okay. White played bishop to c5, which is a very good move. And here too, queen takes a5 is no good. Bishop takes, and if rook takes, then knight to d6 check, while if knight takes, rook takes, and again, white's still just down the one pawn, but here all of his pieces are ready to kill. Black's king is just dead meat. However, if black castled here, I think in this position he's okay. I mean, after white plays b4, certainly white's got a fine position. All of his pieces are quite nicely posted, but still, he needs to prove it. So there's black's king is now quite secure, and the knight on d5 is well posted. So white certainly has plenty of good compensation and various attacking ideas, but black's position is defensible, so it's still very much a game at this point. All right, well, Straczynski instead played bishop takes g4, and after queen takes g4, well, now one problem is that he can't castle on account of the various pins, like the pin on the g-pawn, leaving f6 underprotected for one thing, and his pieces are just, again, in general, quite loose here. Now, if he tries queen takes a5, this is no good because the rook takes d5, and if knight takes d5, knight to d6 check is winning, because wherever the king goes, knight to b7 check is next, winning the queen. However, what black could have done here is not necessarily castle right away, but play h5 first, and after queen f3, then castle. So white's still better here, but in this position, again, black can certainly fight here. I mean, he'll probably lose the h-pawn, but material will be even, and again, there are defensive resources in this position. So white's certainly preferable here, but it's not going to be quick death here. All right. Well, instead, Straczynski played rook to d8, which is sensible too. It overprotects the d5, the knight on d5, and there are some lines where white had queen to d7 possibilities. That's now off limits. Okay. Becerra played b4, cementing the knight and the bishop on their fine locations. And now, if black castles, he'll lose to rook takes f6. So rook takes f6 is now very strong. Knight f6, king h8, and now knight d5. So even further tactics here, because if we just count the material here, black is okay. I mean, two pieces are usually going to be better than a rook and a pawn, especially in a position like this where the pawn, black's pawn majority on the king side isn't any kind of factor at all. But it turns out that there are even further tactical problems that he has to worry about. So knight to d5, and after knight takes d5, bishop f8, rook d5, and now, among other things, queen d1 is simply winning for white. So it's up a piece for two pawns, but more importantly, well, okay, it could be three pawns if queen takes a2, but then rook to d8 just wins immediately, just forces mate. While if black trades queens, then the pawns are no factor at all, and black's queenside pawns are kind of weak too. So anyway, white's winning here. All right, so castling for black is no good. So instead he tried h5, excuse me, the idea we mentioned before, queen f3. And here Straczynski makes probably the losing move, but he's already in real trouble. I mean, he's clearly worse at this point. And with rook to h6, I mean, this is a really natural move, but Becerra finds an excellent way of exploiting this error. So first he plays c4, which is a very good move. And the point of this is to bring the knight from a5 back to a more central location. So after, for example, bc, knight c4, you can see this guy is ready to jump in at d6. And in some positions, though not here, bishop to b6 might be playable too. Okay, so Straczynski played knight to f4. And this seems reasonable. It closes up the f-file, which has certainly been a sore spot for black in many of the variations we looked at. And it doesn't invite the knight from a5 back into the game. And Straczynski's maybe also hoping to trade off some pieces, the rook in particular. The problem is that while it does exchange a pair of rooks, white is able to utilize the d-file with his remaining rook, while the rook on h6 is kind of out of the game at this point. So it does prevent knight takes f6 from wrecking black's kingside pawns, but in this position, more important things are afoot. Okay, so white exchanges, and now plays knight to b7. And here, finally, Straczynski blunders, but he's already in a lost position. So the blunder was queen to d3, and here's a good moment for you to stop the recording and see if you can figure out why exactly this is a blunder. Okay, the answer, I hope, is pretty evident to you. It's rook to d1, taking advantage of, in effect, a back rank mating situation. If queen takes f3, rook to d8 is mate. Before we see what happened in the game, let's take a look at what he could have played instead and how that would have been defeated as well. So queen to c7 was the better move. But after knight from b to d6 check, black is just in big trouble either way. One very elegant line is with king to d7, rook to d1, threatening various discoveries. And the only place for the king to avoid some kind of discovered check on the next move is king to e6. But now, and just note, kind of ironically, that black's not exchanging off the c-pawn, first of all, didn't stop white from getting the knight from a5 to d6 anyway. And secondly, it in fact ended up backfiring because now he can't put one of his own pieces on d5 to block the d-file. All right, so anyway, king to e6, and now this very nice little pirouette here. Knight to e8, attacking the black queen. And now knight takes f6, which protects the knight on e8 as well, so black has to take, and then knight to g7 mate. So that would have been a much nicer way to finish the game And had that happened, maybe the game would have finished higher in the other judge's estimation. All right, so anyway, after knight b to d6 check, the other line is king to f8. Now knight to f5 is very strong, just piling up on the knight on e7, hitting the rook on h6. And after rook g6, knight f6 wins material. Now black can play rook g2 check, but after king to h1, it's kind of a dead end. And even worse, well, it's a dead end in a very strong sense. Queen a8 check, and queen takes c8 mate. Okay, so that's what would have happened on queen c7. On queen d3, we just had a very few moves left. B takes c4, knight b to d6 check. So he could have played rook takes d3, but this is even more forceful. Knight takes c4, taking advantage of the pin. And now after this, bishop takes e7 wins even more material. And so in this position, Strapunski resigned. So a very nice game by Becerra. Won in accuracy, but by and large a very forceful and really, to my mind, impressive demonstration of the power of the initiative, and against a very, very quality opponent. I mean, Strapunski is a good, strong grandmaster, and he plays the Kahn variation quite regularly. So it wasn't that he was caught in unfamiliar territory either. So I thought quite highly of this game. All right, on to the next game, which just about all the other judges thought quite highly of, but I didn't. All right, so this is between Eugene Perelstein, who had white, playing for the... actually, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure he played for Boston, and Pascal Charbonneau, who played for New York. Okay, so Perelstein's white, plays the English. All right, at this point, it's still not clear if it's going to become a King's Indian or an English, and only now with white playing d3, the more restrained move, is that are we officially in English territory here. So really a Sicilian dragon in reverse. Okay, knight c6, and now Perelstein plays bishop to g5. And while it's certainly not the only move, it's a pretty standard kind of idea. And the point of this is simply to exchange off. Well, okay, let me take a step back here. White's trumps in this position involve light squares. So d5 is a great central square. I mean, the pawn's covering it, the knight on c3 is covering it, and probably wouldn't even mind occupying it. And if the knight on f3 moves, the bishop's hitting d5, and in fact, all the squares on the long diagonal. And white could even consider some kind of long-winded maneuver like knight e1, c2, e3, d5, which is not at all unusual in the English. It might be a little unusual in this particular variation, but it's a very standard idea. The main move here is to play rook to b1. And the point of this is to try to extend the diagonal with b4, b5, kind of clearing everybody out of the way, and then expanding on the queen side while trying to use the light squares on the long diagonal. All right, but bishop to g5 is also a very logical move. And the point is that with all of white's pieces having these light square duties, what piece is left out? Well, a dark squared bishop, of course. That can't go on any light square at all. So we exchange it off, and we exchange it for one of black's defenders of these central light squares. And, okay, so we get rid of what in effect seems to be a kind of a superfluous piece, while getting rid of a piece that is quite relevant. So we're giving up the bishop pair, but white certainly has plenty of compensation for that. Okay, so black played h6, and the exchange took place. Now rook to b1. And here white played knight to d2. Okay. Yeah, now there's something that I wanted to say about something similar, but okay, we'll go back. We'll come back to this position. All right, black played bishop to g7, which is useful to get the knight out of the way. The bishop out of the way of any knight attacks on e4 or d5, but more to the point, to clear the path for the f-pawn to start running down the board. Okay, now here Perelstein played rook to e1, and I'm not sure that this is, well, it's not a great use of a tempo on its own merits, but of course white wanted to avoid the exchange of the light squared bishops after bishop to h3. Now, I'm not really sure that he really should do that, though. There's a game earlier, so rook to e1 is actually a novelty. There's an earlier game between Liviu Dieter Nisipianu and a player named Simon Padros, and played in Barcelona in 2005.
and white won without doing that. So he played knight to d5. It should be pointed out in to just for, I guess, kind of a full disclosure idea that this peon was also much higher rated than his opponent, so he probably could have won with any sound plan. So anyway, c6, takes, knight to b4. So ganging up on this, and white would like to follow up with queen to a4. So a5, queen a4 anyway, bishop h3, takes and takes. And black has managed to affect the exchange of bishops, but all the same, white's still slightly better here. He can't take on c6 because of queen to d7, and then if rook to b6, rook to c8, and goodbye knight. So the pawn is safe for the moment, but still, white's play on the queen side outweighs black's kingside possibilities to some extent. So all this to say that I'm not really too thrilled about rook to e1. Okay, now here, just wanted to point out a little tactical idea that can arise in this opening. e4. Now here it's kind of a blank shot, but if there was a rook on a1, this wouldn't at all. This would win material. So the idea of this little cute tactic is that if knight c takes e4, f5, the knight's trapped. Okay, or if knight d takes e4, f5, this knight's not trapped, but if it goes back to d2, there's bishop takes c3. And okay, but it's here because there's it doesn't really attack anything. White can just play something called like knight to d5 or queen to c2 with roughly equal, maybe marginally better position. All right, but it's an important tactic, and again, in positions like this, before knight to d2, so let's say the rook's back on a1, the bishop's back on g7, then this e4 trick can sometimes be an important one. So the idea would be actually, if the rook is on a1, you can play e4 here, knight takes e4, bishop to g7. Let's say the rook moves, and then, oh no, it doesn't work here. Sorry. I'm trying to think. Shoot. Yeah, there's some very similar position, but it's not coming to mind exactly what it is. So all I can do, I'm afraid, is give you this generalized warning about this e4 trick. So sorry about that, but it is a typical tactic. All right, in any case, black played f5, not bothering with any of these little tricky things. White plays queen to c2, so protecting the knight on c3, connecting his rooks, and also, kind of importantly, one idea may be to play knight to d5, and if black were to take on d5, there's also the possibility of playing cd and putting pressure on the c7 pawn. So it's not that he's necessarily going to do that, but it's another option in this position. Okay, black plays g5, white plays a4, and we've got just a good old-fashioned race here to see who can achieve their goals faster. Now, as a general proposition, you might think that this should just have to favor black. I mean, what's white going to do? Checkmate the a pawn? Black's going after white's king. That's a much bigger game than whatever it is that white's presumably aiming at on the queen side. But the point is that if white can blast the queen side open, then his pieces get so much room that he can kind of encircle black. So he'll get on the 7th rank, for example, and just go from left to right and devastate black's king side before black can actually get over to white's position. And that sort of thing occurs with surprising regularity in the classical King's Indian defense, and in some variations like this in the English as well. Okay, so black plays rook to b8, getting out of the way of a5, a6. White played a5. Black plays h5. And, okay, so now it's time for white to decide what exactly he's going to do to break through. See here, if he plays a move like a6, black just plays b6, and sure, there's, the light squares are opened up there, but white has to break through. And if he can't break through, then he's got nothing. And black, of course, will continue to advance his kingside pawns until something really good happens. So the best way to play maybe b6 here. So it's a temporary pawn sack, but that's okay. I mean, we simply want to open up lines. And if something like a takes b6, ab, let's say he plays c6. All right, this might be reasonable. among other things, white might try to play rook a1 and rook a7, and either rook to a1 or queen a4, and try to break in over there. So that might be a possible continuation. Well, I mean, that would seem to be forced, because I don't think a6 is going to do the job here. But maybe a6 might be interesting. I'm not entirely sure about this. But takes... Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was loosening the rook back on the a file, so never mind that. So what else can we do? Yeah, no, we got to play ab. Okay, so c6. Yeah, I mean, that would be the basic way for white to try to proceed here. Okay, well, at any rate, I think white's move was okay too. So nothing really wrong with knight to d5. But after h4, I think there is something definitely wrong with the next move. Alright, so here I think there are a few things that he could have considered. So one is just to play g takes h4 with the kind of ironic point that after, let's say, if black recaptures, white can consider things like king to h1 followed by rook to g1, and actually going for a little pressure himself over there. I mean, the position is actually, or white actually has a fair amount of space for his pieces on the king side too. So it's not really a given that he's in big trouble there. Now, black could play g4, but okay, even there, it's far from fatal. At some point, black will have to play f4, and then white can use the e4 square for his pieces. Excuse me. And it's important to note that white's pawn is still on e2, so that way, you know, g4, f4, f3. Okay, he's got the pawn to capture there. All right, another idea for white is still a6. It's not, again, I mean, a little bit of a concern because it's locking up some lines, but after b6, the idea might be to play knight to b4, and then play knight to c6, and just really try to put as many pieces on this long diagonal as possible. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think if white can't get in c5 fairly quickly, then he could have some troubles there. But it is an interesting idea. Yeah, okay, stick with that. So knight c6, I think, is at least quite interesting. Another idea may be just to play queen to a4, and to prepare at some point b6. Okay, so of course the queen would be hanging at this moment, but to set it up. All right, instead though he played c5, and this I think is just an outright mistake. I think here he goes from being equal or maybe even a little bit better to just worse. And the problem is that his, while the aim of blasting open lines on the queen side is completely correct, in fact, he's undermining this great knight on d5. And generally speaking, black actually gets both a fair degree of space on the queen side and pretty comfortable pieces. So he starts with c6, which is a move that before he could never consider playing, but now actually works out pretty well. So takes, knight takes, cd. Maybe that's even a mistake too. Maybe knight to b3 is the better move to dissuade black from playing d takes c5 on account of knight takes c5 and knight e6. But cd, queen d6, and here knight to c4 could have been played. Wouldn't have been fantastic, but I think it would have been maybe at least as good. But he played knight to c3. And now after rook f to c8, I mean, all of a sudden, the position is just strikingly different. I mean, now, okay, the b7 pawn is still a bit of a target, but black has a lot of space in the center, decent play on the queen side. This knight may come to d4 at some moment, which looks like it should be pretty good. And just generally speaking, I mean, it seems that black is pretty healthy here, and maybe even better. Okay, white played queen to a4, getting out of the way of these various nasty possibilities involving the rook on c8. Okay, black took. And now he plays a6 to prevent knight to b5. And here I think the next couple of moves we have another critical pair of moves here. So just as white's playing c5 was kind of a crucial and I think inaccurate decision, here too I think white makes a couple of inaccuracies. All right, now this move is quite surprising to look at, but I think once you see it, you can recognize it as being very strong. and it's g4. All right, so this looks a little bit crazy, but the point is just very natural. We want to have control over these light squares, especially e4. So black's best is actually to play e4, not allowing white to put his knight on e4. So this is kind of like that sweeper sealer twist. So if white were to play d takes e4, I mean ignore bishop takes c3. So if there was no bishop takes c3 and white just played d takes e4, f4 would be the idea, clogging up all kinds of squares from white's pieces. That would be the sweeper sealer thing again. Of course, e4 also has the further benefit that it discovers the attack on the knight on c3, and this pawn on d3 is stuck in place because the knight on c4 is loose too. So g takes f5 is best, renewing the threat of knight takes e4. So black has to play bishop takes c3, fe takes, and after rook f8, threatening to take on f2, knight e3, takes and takes, we have a very interesting and dynamically balanced position. White's got, I think, just one pawn for the exchange, but black's king, sorry, I'm fiddling with my mic here. Black's king, is very exposed, and white's e6 pawn could prove quite dangerous, and that's enough for the position again to be roughly balanced. So this, I think, would have been the best way for black to continue after, or the best way for white to continue after queen to c5. So g4 is a good move. Played rook e to c1, which is quite natural, and black played e4 anyway. And again, white's, sorry, still messing with the mic there. Okay, I think this is better. All right, so white's knights are still very awkward, and while I think it's objectively an error, Perelstein's decision is at least, I think, quite understandable. So he plays knight takes e4, giving up the knight for a couple of pawns, but achieving some stability in the process. Now, it might look like he's winning, or he's not even really giving up any material at all because of the rook on c8, but because of some tactical reasons, he doesn't get that. He doesn't get to ever win the exchange there. So queen to d4, and now knight takes c8 is impossible because the queen takes a4. So white swaps, and now knight takes c8 is still impossible. Well, it's possible, but it's very bad because if knight takes e2 check, followed by knight takes c1. And it's important, and maybe a fortuitous matter, that the bishop on e6 is over-attacking the knight on c8. So rook c1, rook c8, and white's position is hopeless. So instead of knight takes c8 here, white played rook takes c8, and after bishop c8 took again, and then took on e4, and we reached this position, where white's only got, for the moment, one pawn for the piece, but black's queenside pawns are at least don't seem to be very long for this world. Now here, Perelstein makes another mistake. I mean, this is just a very clear error. I mean, so other things, I think, are much more debatable. I think c5 was a mistake, but even that was quite understandable. But here, I don't really get why he did what he did, unless perhaps time pressure was the matter. So the right move here is just king to f1, making sure that we force the situation. I mean, the knight can come to c3, but it can come to c3 in any case. So we'll see the difference momentarily. After king to g2, black doesn't bother with knight c3, but plays rook to c5, and now he's going to win white's a pawn without losing his own. So rook takes b7, rook a5, rook a7, and here black, I think, can just win or achieve a winning position, a stable winning position, with bishop to d4. So after rook a8 and then bishop to b7, it looks like white's okay. I mean, he's going to win the a6 pawn, and then nothing too bad will happen to him. But here's the problem. Black has rook to f5. And whether white plays rook a6 and allows rook f2, or plays f4 and allows black to keep the a pawn, in both cases, I believe he's simply losing. So that was a mistake by Charbonneau. Perelstein caught a break when black played rook to a4. And now after bishop to b7, it turns out that white does win the a pawn. Because if a5, it's just kind of remarkable, but black's king is in such trouble that white forces an immediate draw here. So if king h8, rook checks, bishop checks, rook checks, and now black is even losing because
loses the rook here. Alright, so the better move is, of course, king to h7. If you go king f7, f8 I mean, then simply rook to f7 check, and that's no good, because king g8, rook f4 is discovered check, and we win the rook. Or, of course, king e8, we just take the bishop on g7. So king h7 is the only move that makes any sense. Bishop to e4 check. Again, king h8 loses the bishop after rook a8 check. And king g8, bishop d5 is just a repetition. So a5 is a bad move, but that means that black is losing the pawn. So knight c3, rook a6. And this endgame should be drawn, but Charbonneau plays very, very well the rest of the way. Plays very resourcefully and manages to outplay Perlstein. So this is, I think, what really made the game impressive to a lot of people who were watching it, that, you know, it looks like it's just a draw, and Charbonneau keeps fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and finally wins the game. So from that standpoint, I can understand the enthusiasm for the game. But from the accuracy standpoint and just the sheer raw excitement of it as a game, not as a spectacle that fans are watching, I don't get it. So maybe you disagree with me, and that's fine. You know, that's there's room for all kinds of taste in chess. So anyway, let's quickly go through the rest here and get to the critical moments. Of course, white would be very happy to trade the rooks. Frankly, I'd be happy to trade off anything, really. Any of the pieces being exchanged is good for him. Okay, so he shuts off the rook for the moment. Of course, black can't take on f2 because of rook f7 check. Alright, so black's made some progress. He's won the f-pawn. But white gets the g-pawn. And it seems like, again, a draw should be the expected result here. I will say this, though. I mean, if black does win the pawns, I don't think it's a draw then. I'm not sure if it's in the table bases somewhere or not. But, the thing to bear in mind here, and this, I think, is probably what the fans underestimated. And actually, I have experience of this in a different material balance, but something similar. And the point I'm going to make is this, that opposite-colored bishops, in situations where attacks are possible, even in an endgame, often prove advantageous for the side that's doing the attacking. And that's, I think, exactly what ends up happening here. So I think, the fans probably thought opposite-colored bishops, this is a dead draw, you can try, but it's pointless. But, in fact, no, I mean, there are a lot of mating nets that can get constructed where the bishop on c4 is at best, or on the bishop, light-squared bishop in general, is just a minor impediment, and for the most part, black can simply work around it. And that's what ends up happening at the end of the game. Okay, so we continue here, knight to e2. There goes that pawn. And I don't know if this is a draw. I really don't know. It's not easy for either side, really. But I think white certainly has the bigger difficulty here. So now the king is starting to get tied up a bit, and I believe that this is white's last try. So I don't know if there's any win for black after rook to d8. And generally speaking, I would say that the thing that white needs to do in this endgame is to keep his rook active, and doing that involves not leaving it bunched up in a square like d5. So I mean, on d5, I mean, this is a great square if it's a knight, if it's a queen, if it's a bishop, pieces that benefit from centralization. But the thing to remember about rooks is that it doesn't matter what square you put a rook on. If it's an empty board, it covers 14 squares on any of them. So rooks are just as happy from a distance as they are close up. And in fact, typically, in endgames, they're happier at a distance because then they don't get in the way of other pieces, or they're not susceptible to attack from the opponent's pieces. Alright, well, so rook to d8 I think is forced here, but he played rook to a8. On rook to d8, just to take a quick look, I mean, this is looking kind of scary, but this is kind of a version of the second-rank defense from the rook and bishop versus rook ending, and I certainly wouldn't bet that white is drawing this, but at least there's no evident win for black at this point. Let's put it that way. Alright, so after rook to a5, now black gets the second rank, and the king is cut off. So that was the difference with the rook to d8 lines. it wasn't so easy for black to keep the white king pinned in. But now there's no real defense from the rook, and so it's just a matter of whether black can perfectly coordinate his pieces to deliver a checkmate. And as we'll see, he can. So rook to a2, rook e7 check, and this is a very good move. It forces white's king to go towards the fatal h8 corner, because if he goes to d8, then he gets mated in two. Bishop c7 and knight to d6. So he plays king to f8. Now king to g5, another very good move. Rook g2 and king f6. Okay, so things are looking increasingly bleak for the white king, which is going to get driven to h8 very soon. The idea is to play bishop to d6, and then move the rook, let's say, back somewhere. So the king has to go to g8, and then the rook can come back to e8. Anyway, you can see him. He's getting forced into that corner. A variety of ways to do it. White plays rook to f2 with the transparent but easily thwarted threat of rook takes f5 check, followed by king takes e7. So bishop d6 sets up the discovery, and also, of course, overprotects the rook. So king to g8, rook g7, king h8, and now bishop to e5. And now all that black needs to do is to move the king out of the way, or to move the rook out of the way, and then move the king. So one or the other, and it'll end up being both, with a quick mate to follow. White played d4, bishop takes d4, rook f1, rook c7, and here white resigned. And the threat is not just to take the bishop, which would be decisive, of course, by itself, but also to deliver mate. So let's say bishop to a6, king e6 check, king g8, rook g7 check, and now whichever way the king goes, he gets mated. So if he goes to f8, check and mate, and if he goes to h8, then we have this. So a nice ending by Charbonneau. So he was absolutely correct in his assessment of it, to head for this endgame and to play it out, and he handled it very, very well. So it was definitely an impressive, definitely some impressive technique by Charbonneau here. And, Perlstein, I think, doesn't really deserve too much censure for losing this. I mean, especially in time trouble, his chances of holding this, I think, in the long run were essentially non-existent. Even if it's, by some miracle, a table-based draw, I mean, as a practical matter, it's very, very difficult. But the first part of the game, I think, was just really not played especially well. Compared to the games it's competing with, so it's not that it was uninteresting and that it was, one blunder after another or anything like that. I mean, it was a very complicated position, and I think all of the mistakes, except for white's king to g2 instead of king to f1, were all quite understandable. But just as an objective matter, we're talking about the game of the year. I think there were too many errors from that standpoint for it to be as highly rated as it was. But in any case, certainly a very interesting game and a hard-fought struggle. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed both of the games. I think they both certainly, if one didn't appeal to you, hopefully the other did. And that would be true, I hope, whichever way you came down in your preferences here. So thanks a lot, and let me invite everyone to check out my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com. So have a look at that if you'd like, and I'll see you next week with the fifth place finishing game in the 2007 U.S. Chess League Game of the Year contest. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.